Hello, everyone. Rod here, and I want to welcome you to this special BackTrack episode of Eye on Sci-Fi podcast. Episode 193 revisits my 2019 conversation with Emmy Award-winning director Cameo Wood. During that conversation, we discuss her remarkable sci-fi short film, Real Artist, based on the short story by author Ken Liu. During that conversation, we discussed the possible impact and reception of artificial intelligence on society at large. Looking back on that conversation, it seems eerily prescient, and it is most definitely more relevant now with the introduction of generative AI tools such as Chat GPT, DALL-E, Midjourney, and Bard. So without further ado, please enjoy our revisit with our conversation with Emmy Award-winning director Cameo Wood. Hi, this is Rod Faulkner, and you are listening to the SeventhMatrix.com Eye on Sci-Fi podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 59 of the SeventhMatrix.com Eye on Sci-Fi podcast, the podcast where we share with you terrific indie, science fiction, and fantasy, online short films and web series, as well as interviews with fascinating filmmakers and other creatives. Thank you for listening. This episode features our conversation with acclaimed filmmaker Cameo Wood. Cameo is the writer, producer, and director of the Emmy, yes, you heard that right, Emmy Award-winning science fiction short film, Real Artist. Real Artist is the adaptation of the science fiction short story by lauded science fiction author Ken Liu, and it stars Tiffany Hines and Tamlin Tomita. During our conversation, Cameo discusses her inspiration for adapting Real Artist to film. Let me just say that Cameo has one of the most fascinating professional backgrounds out of anyone that we have ever interviewed on the podcast thus far. Her background includes neuroscience and artificial intelligence, and before she became a filmmaker, she was also an engineer for some pretty notable technology companies, including GTE Labs, Lucent, and Cisco. Because of her background in engineering and neuroscience and artificial intelligence, Cameo shared her perspective on how these emerging technologies are already impacting our daily life and how they will also impact the way that art is both created and consumed. It was a very interesting conversation with an extremely fascinating person. So, without further ado, please enjoy the Eye on Sci-Fi podcast interview with Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Cameo Wood. Cameo Wood, hello and welcome to the Eye on Sci-Fi podcast.
Thank you so very much for having me. I'm so excited to be on. I love the show.
Oh, thank you so much. And of course, we have you on the show to talk about your Emmy Award-winning sci-fi short film, Real Artist. And first, let me congratulate you on your Emmy Award.
Oh, thank you so very much. It was a big surprise. So we're thrilled to have, gotten it. It was a real pleasure.
Well, for our listeners who may not be familiar with what Real Artist is about, how would you describe its premise?
Real Artists is about a young woman who is interviewing for her dream job at a large animation studio. And through the course of the interview, she discovers that films are no longer made entirely by people.
Wow. And of course, the short film is based on a short story by science fiction author Ken Liu. Is that correct?
That is right. Yeah. And he actually just got one of his short stories, I think called The Inventor, was just optioned and is about to be made into a film by the producers of The Arrival. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting to see his career take off.
Yeah, that is very exciting. And he's also one of the most interesting emerging voices in science fiction. I've read some of his work and it's really unique. So I'm very happy to see his career just take off the way that it has.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ken is, he was a lawyer and an engineer who finally decided just to focus on his fiction. And I think that you can see that just in the last, 8 or 9 years, he's become, he's won the Hugo, the Nebula, the World Fantasy. He's now going to be
Right.
like a major motion picture. I mean, this is a person who's really exemplified what excellence is in storytelling and and also in success.
How did you come across Ken Liu's story that formed the basis of Real Artists? And then what was it about the story that inspired you so to adapt it to film?
So I decided, so I was on a flight and I needed something to read during takeoff and landing because I wasn't allowed to use my phone at the time. And I picked up a copy of MIT's Technology Review magazine. They had a special edition focusing on science fiction. And I was reading through the various short stories, and one of them was Real Artists. So I was reading Real Artists, and I have a background in both neuroscience and artificial intelligence. So as I was reading Real Artists, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is something I could totally make. It was just very visual to me, and I had a pretty clear idea of what I would want to do with it. So while I was on the plane, right after finishing reading it, I emailed Ken and I just said, "Hey, I love this short story and I want to make it into a movie." And he said, "Absolutely, that sounds great." So it was all decided within about 20 minutes.
As these things happen.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, you mentioned that Ken himself is an engineer. You yourself were an engineer before you became a filmmaker, and you worked for some notable companies like Sprint, GTE Labs, Cisco. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
So I know that you must have a unique perspective on how emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and virtual and augmented reality are already impacting our lives. And one of the things that I personally found so compelling about Real Artists is that it really explores that impact in terms of how we may consume and create art. Why do you feel that that was an important exploration to have on film?
Um, I feel like throughout history, ever since we started having any kind of automatic mechanisms, whether they were in Egyptian temples as part of the mysteries or in the 16th and 17th centuries when we began to have automatons, and even now when we're starting to talk about, artificial intelligence with regard to art, I think there's always been this a little bit of panic around the idea of artificial intelligence or any kind of augmented intelligence being able to surpass us in art in some way. And I think it's been something that we've been scared of. It's like this existential crisis that we've been going through for thousands of years. And but the funny thing is, with artificial intelligence or automatons, is that whenever we have a machine um, before it's ubiquitous, we're terrified of it and we think it's going to be the end of everything. And then when it is ubiquitous, we don't really think of it as AI anymore. If you had told a cartographer, 200 years ago that we wouldn't really have cartographers anymore, that wouldn't really be a thing. We would just load things into our, map system on our phone and it would tell us how to get there. Um, and so it's always terrifying until it happens. And so I think that, right now we think that, uh, collaborating with an artificial intelligence while making art is terrifying. But, we use it in various ways, like when we are making movies and we use generative crowds and we use it in tiny ways. And we don't think of that as being taking away from the artist. But
Right.
just like one level more, we're like, oh no, then that's going to be too far. But of course, we're going to get there. We're going to be like, oh, well, now the artist is doing this other thing that's even more amazing that couldn't have been done without AI. So yeah, I think it's important to talk about the boundaries of what we emotionally can accept as collaboration with AI, and the things that make us uncomfortable. And it's interesting because a lot of people think that my film is a negative commentary about technology and AI, when really I just feel like it's just discussing how people feel about AI. And I'm trying not to make a value judgment. It's more like just discussing our feelings and how we respond to technology.
Right. Now, let me ask you what your opinion is on, of course, technology is ever changing, as you just stated, and artificial intelligence really is already pretty pervasive. We have
Hmm.
these new generation of digital assistants like Siri and Alexa, but I will speak for myself personally. My main concern with that is that these technologies are controlled by
Hmm.
very powerful corporations who don't
Hmm.
have a really good track record in terms of putting consumers' privacy first. And then there's
Hmm.
also the threat of being hacked.
Sure.
How do you feel about that? Do you feel that that's a valid concern? And how should that enter into conversations regarding this technology? Because it's here, it's not going anywhere. So
Absolutely.
how can we address that?
I think that, I actually I share your concerns, absolutely. I think that it's hard as a consumer right now to really understand um, the implications of all the technology that we allow in our homes and how quickly that technology changes from something benign to something volatile. And I think that, for example, let's take Nest. Nest was a small
Yes.
startup that got bought by Google. And, at the time, people just sort of thought it was a thermostat. And then Google announced that it had secretly turned the Nest into a Google audio device that could listen and respond without telling the consumer. And it was
Wow.
an invisible feature. So that's like an example of something where you think it's just like a thermostat, and suddenly it's been recording your calls, sending them to Indonesia for people to do quality control on your conversations. So,
That's
you
pretty
know,
unnerving.
absolutely. And so part of I think the problem is that the onus is completely on the consumer to determine their safety. And for myself, what I do in these cases is I try to look at companies where I am not the product. So, for example, with Google, so many of their products are subsidized or free because they are selling me as a product that can be, ads can be sold to be seen by me. And
Right.
I have no rights at Google. However, privacy with some companies, like for example, Apple does have an excellent privacy policy. They don't record the calls and send them to humans for quality control. With Apple, you pay dearly for hardware, but then you are never the product. So, as opposed to other companies like Facebook or Google. So I think that that's one thing is following the money and understanding what you're actually getting. And if it's free, then you're probably the product. And yeah, so things are changing. So I think, yeah, so I think it'll be a very interesting future to see, how many products and things people need. Like for example, people have to have phones and internet, and if they're free or nearly free through Google, it seems reasonable just to use these free products, even at the cost of their privacy, because a lot of people do sort of weigh their privacy very low. Because even though people have privacy concerns, they're happy to have their Gmail accounts because the convenience overrides their concerns for privacy.
Right, right. So as consumers, it just behooves us to be as informed as possible when we're making choices about the products that we decide to use.
Yeah, I think that that's the more succinct way to say it. Yeah.
Your way was far more elegant, though. So, Cameo, I do want to talk about the short film itself, and
Mhm.
it is one of the most beautifully filmed science fiction short films that I have ever seen.
Oh,
And I was also taken by your incredible cast. And
hmm.
Real Artist stars Tiffany Hines and Tamlin Tomita as the co-stars. Very talented actresses. How did they become involved in the project?
Yeah. No. before I start, did you get a chance to read Ken's original short story yet, or no?
Not yet.
Okay. So in the original short story, it was an older man interviewing a younger woman.
Oh,
The older
really?
man was a white guy,
Okay.
and the young girl was Asian. And so I had talked to Ken early on, and I also changed the ending. So if you're listening to this, I recommend reading the story actually because it's so different than the movie. So recommend it. Anyway, so I talked to Ken about this and sort of felt that some of the connotations regarding this drug that's used in the movie called tabula rasa, that it would be inappropriate and a different type of story if it was used by an older white man on a younger girl.
Oh, yeah.
So I decided to change that just for that reason. So then, once I sort of understood that, and I also really wanted to cast, women of color, because I feel that in animation and in a lot of technology fields, too often we have films or stories that are much more about, race or gender in the workplace. And I didn't want that to be the focus of the story. I wanted instead to normalize two amazing, talented women at the top of their game and just happen to have them be women of color. So the very first person that we contacted was Tamlin. So one of my producers had met Tamlin through another director, and we contacted her. We sent her a letter from Ken and myself and the script, and she immediately responded and said, "Yes, of course, I would love to be in this movie."
Oh,
So she
great.
was incredibly easy. Um, but then I had to find I wanted to find a young African American actress. But it was actually very hard to find one that was around Tamlin's height because Tamlin's, a little short. So I think we approached something incredible, like 70 actresses.
Oh,
It was
wow.
very hard to find actresses. But part of it too was that we had excellent taste. So we were contacting people like Tessa Thompson before Tessa Thompson was in like Dear Black People. So
Really? Okay.
yeah.
That
So
is cool.
basically everyone that we talked to was pretty much like a huge actor now.
Oh, wow.
So I mean, yay us, I guess. But yeah, and it's funny. So we were going through, and then someone recommended Tiffany, and I already knew Tiffany because I used to watch Bones, and I remember the very first time I saw her come on screen, and just thinking, oh my gosh, she's so visually compelling. And I had seen her in some other stuff, and like I think she was in the season finale of Grey's Anatomy season 1, with Tessa Thompson actually.
Wow.
And and so yeah, so I was, when she sort of came up as a person, I was pretty excited, and we contacted her, and she was very excited about the project. She's a huge sci-fi fan. We, got in a video conference together, and we were also major Game of Thrones fans. So yeah, so we bonded, and she was just, the exact right fit. So yeah, then we cast her right away.
Well, she and Miss Tomita both did an amazing job. And I wanted to make sure to ask you during the production of the short film, can you recall was there one moment when you thought, you know what, I think we've got something pretty special here?
Um, yeah. So my favorite scene, I think, was when the two of them were at the table in Paladin's office. And I think that was like our second day of shooting. And I remember, um, the scene when Paladin is kind of offering this ultimatum um, to Sophia. And Sophia, was just very struck. And Paladin was very sort of cool but calculated. And it was just the most beautiful light. So our cinematographer was just doing this amazing job. We had we had a 75% women cast and crew, and I think it's 50% people of color, and just like everybody was just super focused. We're using film. We shot it on 35 millimeter. And just in that moment when everybody was just on point, everybody was present, my actors were putting out these amazing performances, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is actually going to be really beautiful. I can't believe it. And so it was really wonderful.
Well, you mentioned that you had a pretty inclusive team, both in front of and behind the camera for Real Artists. And I know that following your work, that inclusion is very important to you as a filmmaker. Can you articulate why, for you personally, that's important?
Sure. I think that, within the arts and in technology, I feel that, inclusion is something that we give a lot of lip service to. But what is actually, what you see on sets, especially like large Hollywood sets, it is not representative. Lots of TV and movie sets are primarily white men. And psychologically, it's clear why. It's, you get your crew in your early days, and these are the people you work with, and this is a known thing, and there's not a whole lot of pressure to change. And the people who are applying just don't have those jobs on their resume enough to convince you to take a risk. And that's like the psychological reason. It's not a good enough reason. And, especially women of color like Ava DuVernay and Shonda Rhimes. I mean, these are people who understand that this is a massive problem, not just for women of color or people of color in general, but also women. And so they have, especially Ava, has said, I will be the person that doesn't knock on doors. I will, make my own room, and I will make my own cast and crews, and I will give people the opportunities. So that is certainly something I aspire to. So I understand that there are lots of white guys that would love to work on movies, but they have many more opportunities than other people. And I think that when you, especially if you're somebody who's not a white guy, if you're looking for a job or a situation to work that's safe, and when I say safe, I don't mean from like physical harm, but from being respected, a place where you're not seen as like a token representative of some group. No one wants to be the only person, the only woman, the only person of color on a set. You want to see yourself there, hopefully. And so I think that is something that is possible, and that we should strive to do, where we don't have just like one representative of a group on a large set.
Yeah, here, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I do appreciate you being an agent of change, because as you have stated, so many pay lip service to inclusion, but there's still too few that actually put their money where their mouth is. So thank you, Cameo, for doing that in your productions.
Well, it makes it all better anyway. So
it really does. Well, I also recently interviewed a colleague of yours, Sydney Hugh, and she was a participant in a film festival that you co-founded called Coven Film Festival. So I made a note, and I wanted to make sure to ask you about the Coven Film Festival. Can you explain exactly what its mission is?
Yeah. So the Coven Film Festival is focused on films made by women and non-binary people. We focus primarily on films that are made by women and non-binary people, but also we are very careful to make sure that these aren't only stories by white women. We really seek out stories from underrepresented voices, so Native American groups and other kinds of international groups that we just don't hear that much from. And so we we also try to raise money and get sponsors to allow them to fly into San Francisco and stay for a weekend and meet other filmmakers to find, ways to collaborate, whether it's on crews or sets or locations or just ideas. It's a very tight-knit group. Last year, we had 27 filmmakers come in and meet with each other and talk about ideas. We actually just announced on the 1st of July, a couple days ago, that we're open for submissions again. And this time we're doing features. We've hired an amazing programmer, Farida Gabatamosi. She is awesome. She's done programming for Frameline and Mill Valley Film Festival. So we're really hoping to get just excellence in underrepresented voices and films made by women and non-binary people, and also help them find community.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And it sounds like you've already begun building a pretty tight-knit community, too, of women who can support each other. And that's always something that's extremely positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been pretty exciting to see various women that I've met. Like, for example, one person, Bola Ogun, who I met just because she had her film, The Water Phoenix, about a Black mermaid, which
yes, we covered that over at the Seventh Matrix. It is a terrific film.
Exactly, and it's prescient, especially now that we're talking about a Black Ariel, which is so exciting. And so, she and I both won the AT&T Film Festival Emerging Filmmaker Award, given by Ava DuVernay. And since
terrific.
then, so we both won together. And, she became someone who was mentored by Ava. And then she did her other film, Are We Good Parents, which we showed at Coven, which was amazing. And she won Best Director. And then she went on to get her very first directing gig on Queen Sugar, directing for Ava. So it's really been amazing to see, these women just have their careers absolutely take off and have them be part of the festival.
I know that must be very fulfilling.
It definitely is.
What's next for you, Cameo?
So right now I've been working on a couple of feature scripts, but I'm hoping to finish this one in the next couple of next 7 weeks or so.
Okay.
With the hopes that I can start beginning production on it. So definitely a feature is my next step.
Oh, fantastic. Something to definitely look forward to.
I hope so. Thank you.
Well, where can our listeners find out more about you, Real Artist, and all of your other projects that you're working on?
So Real Artist can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and the web at Real Artists Film. And the website is Real Artists Film. Real Artists .film.
Okay.
So sorry about that. Totally blanked.
That's okay.
Then for me, it's just cameowood.com is my website. And I'm Cameo on Twitter and Cameo Wood on Instagram.
And I'll make sure to include all those links in the official show notes of this episode as well.
Yeah, and if you're a filmmaker interested on how films work, we actually have a really great section on the realartists.film website where we have a behind the scenes area where we have a video breakdown of how we made every scene.
Oh, fantastic. I'll definitely check that out myself.
Yeah, I hope you do.
Well, again, Cameo, congratulations on all the success that Real Artists is getting. And it's very well deserved because we follow each other on social media. And so I know that you see all of our posts. We're really big fans. And we are just so excited for all of the other projects that you have coming down the line.
Well, I am excited to share them with everyone, and especially you, for sure. You've been a great supporter of us for just years now.
Oh, thank you. And you have an open invitation to come back at any time to the Eye on Sci-Fi podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
And there you have it, the Eye on Sci-Fi podcast interview with Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Cameo Wood. A link to Cameo's website, as well as to the official website of Real Artist, the short film, will be included in the show notes of this episode. Just visit the7thmatrix.com and navigate to podcast, or use the direct link, the7thmatrix.com/EOSF podcast, to access not only the show notes of this episode, but an archive of show notes from all of our previous episodes as well. Hey everyone, Rod Faulkner here, and before I sign off, I needed to ask your help. Ever since the7thmatrix.com came online in 2013, we have been sharing terrific indie science fiction and fantasy, online short films, and web series on the site ad-free. However, in order to continue our work, we need your help. If you would, please visit the7thmatrix.com/support in order to learn all of the ways in which you can help us continue to do the work that we do. You can make a donation via our PayPal button, become a monthly supporter via Gumroad, or purchase our science fiction and fantasy short film guide that contains over 30 hours of outstanding indie science fiction and fantasy short films. Or you can choose to support one of the Eye on Sci-Fi podcast sponsors. But either way, your support is vital to us, and we thank you. And that concludes another episode of the 7th Matrix Eye on Sci-Fi podcast. Thanks again for listening, and remember to subscribe to us via our RSS feed, on iTunes, or wherever you found us. And please leave us a review on iTunes as well. That really helps others find us, and I really appreciate it. Make sure to head over to the7thmatrix.com to discover a wealth of independent science fiction and fantasy content that we have collected there. Sign up for our newsletter so that you will receive our latest discoveries directly into your inbox. So until next episode, everyone, remember to take a break, escape the mundane, and enter the fantastic. Take care.